The theme is inspiration tonight. And when we think of inspiration, we think of wonderful things, don't we? We think of inspirational leaders who inspire their followers to do great things, great constructive things. And it sounds like all sweetness and light. But if you know my work, you know I don't do sweetness and light. If you think of the great inspirational leaders of the past, of course, people will come to mind like Mohandas Gandhi and Martin Luther King. But Hitler should also come to mind. And Osama bin Laden should also come to mind. So I want to share a few thoughts with you about how people inspire us to do evil, to commit atrocity. Harming others is not easy. In the movies, it's easy. In the movies, it's easy to confront someone and put a bullet in their head. But in real life, it's not. It is extraordinarily difficult to look into another human being's eyes and shoot them, or to plunge a blade into soft viscera. And so, those who want us to do harm, those who want us to go to war, or to commit genocide, or to involve ourselves in any of the other atrocities that has scarred the history of the human race, have to find some way of overcoming those inhibitions, have to find some way of disabling whatever it is that causes us to hold back when we recognize the humanity of another. Now, there are many ways that this is done, and I could speak about this for a very long time. However, tonight, I'm just going to talk about one mechanism for doing this, one way that we bring ourselves and others bring us to committing acts of terrible atrocity. And when we're not committing them, to sit indifferently while they're unfolding elsewhere in the world as they are at this very moment. I call this process dehumanization. Now, this is a word that's used in many ways, in many different contexts, but I mean something very specific by it. When we dehumanize others, we think of them, we conceive of them as subhuman creatures that it is either permissible to harm or even obligatory to harm. Just as it's obligatory to exterminate the roaches infesting your kitchen, so you may gain the idea through propaganda or through your own creative imagination that there are groups of people who are in every important respect morally equivalent to cockroaches. Now, how can that work? How is it possible for us to look at another human being and think of them as less than human? And I hasten to add, this is not something metaphorical. This is not a way of talking. The power of dehumanization stems from the fact that when we dehumanize others, indeed, we genuinely, literally do think of them as subhuman creatures. It's a puzzle, isn't it? As Shakespeare had Shylock say in The Merchant of Venice, "Hath not a Jew eyes, hath not a Jew hands? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh?" How can we think of a person who's just like us outwardly as inwardly very, very different? Well, there are two processes at work. One of them is known in the literature as psychological essentialism. This is a deeply rooted psychological tendency that makes us capable of distinguishing between how things appear and how they really are, or really what they really are. Fool's gold, after all, looks just like gold, but it isn't gold. There's something that makes fool's gold that isn't what makes gold gold. And this is what we describe as the essence of the thing, the essence of the kind of thing. Now, outside of chemistry, in fact, essentialism is almost always false. It's false in biology, and it's false when we're thinking of human populations. Neither species nor social groups have essences. But it is an almost irresistible way of thinking. And that gives us part of the story of how it's possible to take someone who looks just like us, who acts just like us, who has the same morphology, that speaks, that wears clothes, that's bipedal, and think of them as something akin to rats. The idea is that although they may appear human, inside, where it really counts, they're not human at all. And therefore, it is permissible to exploit them, to harm them, to exterminate them. But that's only part of the story. Because I have not given you any account of what it means to regard others as subhuman, as less than human. To regard others as less than human, we have to have an idea of a sort of hierarchy. We have to have the idea that the cosmos is ordered according to a hierarchy of intrinsic value, that some things have greater essential value than others, some kinds of things. Now, this is a very old idea. It was traditionally called the great chain of being. Picture the world as consisting of kinds of things with the most perfect being at the apex of the hierarchy. Traditionally, the most perfect being was, of course, God, and then the angels, and we human beings modestly placed ourselves just below the angels. With the much vaunted death of God, we human beings have come to place us at the top. And below this top rank are serried ranks of other organisms, mammals and birds and reptiles and amphibia, right down through the realm of minerals, down to the lowest rank of all, inert matter, worthless matter. This, scientifically, is a false picture of the world. But it is a very compelling picture of the world, and I think it's probably a necessary picture of the world. So when we're thinking naturally and not self-consciously, we do organize things into higher and lower. And those things that are highest on the hierarchy deserve the greatest moral consideration. Hence, although I'm speaking to Mainers here, who would not hesitate to shuck an oyster or to drop a live lobster into a pot of boiling water, you would probably be much less keen on dropping a live baby into a pot of boiling water, or shucking a lamb, because you are making these distinctions. And if you happen to be a vegan, we can extend the analogy to your attitude towards carrots and potatoes. So with this notion of a hierarchy, now this gives us a fuller notion of how dehumanization works. When we dehumanize others, we do not merely think of them as inwardly different from our kind, the human kind, and human just means our kind. I could go on a long time about that too. But we think of them as less than us, as lower on the cosmic hierarchy. And that permits us to perform acts upon them that would otherwise not only be morally impermissible, but would probably be psychologically impossible. Now the question arises, we have the how, at least a brief account of the how. What about the why? Well, in fact, I've already explained the why. That's how I started. We human beings are caught in an interesting bind, because on occasion, It is extraordinarily advantageous for us to do terrible things to our fellow Homo sapiens, to wage war upon them, to steal their resources, or to exploit their labor without recompense. But at the same time, in the act of recognizing them as fellow human beings, we encounter profound inner inhibitions against performing such acts. We are between a rock and a hard place. And dehumanization is a way out. In a way, it's more a solution than a problem. That is, through dehumanizing others, we are able to disable those very inhibitions which would keep us from each other's throats. Now, I want to close by making a point. It was a point I made actually at the G20 conference, speaking to the assembled dignitaries. This is obviously something really, really important to understand. If we really do care about humanity and decency and peace, we should treat dehumanization with the same seriousness that we treated cholera and smallpox. We should devote resources to studying it. We should devote resources to disarming it. But the fact is, to the best of my knowledge, and I know quite a bit about this, there is nowhere in the world where there is a center, where there is a department, where there is a government agency, where there is an NGO specifically devoted to the study of dehumanization. So although we may say, oh, what a terrible thing, wasn't it terrible what happened in Rwanda, what the Nazis did to the Jews, what happens in wars all the time? We pay lip service to our concern. If we want our future to be less hideous than our past, if we don't want any more Hiroshimas, if we don't want any more Nagasakis, if we don't want any more Auschwitzes, then this has got to change. It's time we took dehumanization seriously. Thank you.